This might be the best basketball game on the Sega Genesis.
He's on fire.
NBA Hangtime for the Sega Genesis is surprising for a 16-bit game.
He's heating up.
It's fast and it really is a ton of fun. And this shows off capabilities that the system had that I didn't even know that it had.
Boom shakalaka.
Now, the crazy thing about this is that I didn't even realize that they came out with NBA Hangtime on the Sega Genesis or the Super Nintendo. You see, back then I knew about the N64 version of NBA Hangtime that came out like 2 or 3 months later. That got a lot of press. And there was also the PlayStation version that also came out back in November 1996. But for the Sega Genesis and the Super Nintendo, I mean, we're talking like the end of the lifespan of these systems, right? The Genesis version, however, is simply spectacular. It's really good. It's extremely close to the arcade version, especially in its graphical clarity.
Incredible.
Now, of course, it doesn't quite have like the bright pixels of the arcade original game.
Raises up. And it holds out. Takes it to the hoop.
And we know that the Genesis couldn't do the sprite scaling right.
Scores.
The arcade version was always going to sound better too.
Amazing.
But the Genesis port still looks really remarkable, especially considering the limitations of the system.
Incredible.
I swear, at least to me, this looks more like a 32X game than a Sega Genesis game.
He shoots. Scores.
Now, as you probably remember from some of my earlier videos, Midway and Acclaim had broken up at some point in time. This is sometime after the home console release of NBA Jam Tournament Edition, which was in 1995. So remember, there was Tournament Edition, and then all of a sudden Acclaim came out with these College Slam games. It was basically the NBA Jam source code that they'd used for the home console ports, but there was no license anywhere, and Midway's name was completely taken away. So there was kind of a breakup. Now, my understanding is that the real reason for this breakup had more to do with the Mortal Kombat games than the NBA Jam games. The idea was that Midway was upset that Acclaim was making a ton of money off the home ports without really doing much work. But the thing is, if you look back, you do have to wonder if the lackluster home console versions of NBA Jam didn't have something to do with that decision. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not that the Sega Genesis versions of NBA Jam are awful. In fact, I think that the Genesis versions are among the best of the many NBA Jam home ports. But if you just glance at the arcade game, you can see right away that Acclaim's Sega Genesis versions just are not there graphically. Again, it's not that these are bad games. It's just that I think Acclaim really could have done a lot better. So the hardest thing to explain in a video is just how a game feels, right? I mean, I can show you how the game looks and how the game sounds, but how it feels is a little bit different. I'm talking like the play control, the overall feeling that you get when you're playing the game. So the thing about the NBA Jam home ports is that they all have a slightly different feel than the arcade game. It feels a little bit cheaper. It feels like the tech really isn't there. The Hangtime ports, however, feel a lot more like the arcade game. They feel a lot smoother, and they feel like they're really supposed to feel. The players seem to react the way you would expect them to what you tell them to do. I'm guessing that that's largely because Midway was making this game in-house instead of using Acclaim and whatever company Acclaim farmed the game out to. The way that the players react to your input, you know, what you push, feels just perfect. Now, sometimes it does feel a little bit slippery, but this is always because of something that you see happening on screen. The NBA Jam ports in the Genesis sometimes felt a little bit jerky in comparison. And in particular, the Genesis version of College Slam really does feel jerky. It's almost like the system can't handle all that the game is offering. Compare that game to Hangtime, and it feels almost like they're two separate generations of console. And you know, that part is really remarkable. I mean, it's really remarkable. You just look at it and you can see, right? The sprites look bigger, but they're not so big that you can't see what's happening. It really does look like it's from a different generation of system. And I mean, this is just 1 year after the NBA Jam home ports, or I should say NBA Jam Tournament Edition home ports had come out for like the Genesis, Super Nintendo, and so on. But the real interesting thing is when you realize that Acclaim's NBA Jam Extreme, which is a horrible game, that game completely skipped the 16-bit consoles altogether. Yeah, you remember NBA Jam Extreme.
Malone, Wade knocks it loose. Maxwell. Stackhouse from the arc. Bang.
That's the 3D abomination that Acclaim came out with in the arcades in early 1996.
Hornacek from the parking lot.
This game really should have died a quick death.
Sit down. Elway. Shot de los Visuals. Down by 2.
Instead, Acclaim came out with a version on the PlayStation.
Malone, what a hit. For 2. Yes.
And then there was this notorious Sega Saturn release, which I've heard all sorts of stories about. So we'll cover those games in future videos. I do want to save myself, and I want to savor every moment of suckiness as I possibly can. Now, I can guarantee that NBA Hangtime in the Genesis was better than either one of those games, even though this Genesis game came out at the end of the Genesis lifespan. Hangtime came out in November 1996, long after most people had stopped caring at all about the old Genesis. In fact, per Wikipedia, only 11 games came out after NBA Hangtime on the Genesis. And as you can see here, 5 of those games were sports games. Okay, I know that Wikipedia is not a great source, so I'll let you guys tell me all that you want to that I'm wrong. But seriously, it really is interesting that this game came out at all. I mean, I remember November 1996 pretty well, actually. Everybody back then was talking about the Saturn and the N64 that had just come out. And it was around this time that you could start getting a brand new Genesis for cheap. I'm talking like $30. The thing is that there weren't a whole ton of people out there talking about games like World Series 98. As a 12-year-old kid, I don't think I even knew that NBA Live 98 eventually came out for the Genesis, for example. The thing is that we were really deep into the 3D era by that time, and consoles that couldn't replicate that 3D experience were pretty much being ignored. GamePro, for example, barely gave the Genesis version of Hangtime a small paragraph hidden in a 200-page issue, and it didn't mention the Super NES version at all. And in retrospect, this really is kind of crazy. Now, I'm not kidding when I tell you that I really think that NBA Hangtime might be the best basketball game on the Sega Genesis, hands down, no questions asked. It really is that good. The game's flow is simply brilliant.
Passes. Incredible.
Now, the sound isn't great, especially the crowd noise,
Raises up. A spectacular dunk.
but it still is a lot better than the old NBA Jam ports.
For 2. Wide. Raises up. He's heating up.
The control is excellent.
He shoots. He scores.
And the game itself is a ton of fun.
He's on fire.
Seriously, I had a hard time putting this one down.
Wild shot. Intercepted. Raises up. He's heating up.
Well, I do have a list of complaints. Of course I do. I always do. But don't worry. I mean, these complaints are relatively minor things, but they are things that you'll notice. For example, I found these lists of hidden characters, and most of the lists seem to be just about the same. But the truth is, I couldn't get any of them to work. I think that I did get the max speed code to work at least, though the game didn't give me any sort of confirmation that the code was working. And basic stuff like the rooftop code or even changing Dennis Rodman's hair color never really worked. It doesn't matter how much I tried. I'm not sure if I was doing something wrong or if nobody bothered to, actually test the codes out in the Genesis version.
Scores.
Now, it's also possible that maybe there are revised versions of this cartridge that I just didn't know about, but my guess is that whoever came up with this list of cheats just copied it off of the arcade list and figured that it was the same. I mean, it's not like tons of people were buying NBA Hangtime on the Genesis in like 1996, 1997. Nobody was buying Genesis games by that time. Anyway, that part's not really that important. It just kind of sucks because I can't show you anything that I can't get to work. Now, sometimes the screen moves a little bit too slowly, especially if there's a pass to a character on like the other side of the screen. This was most apparent when I had the max speed code on. This was actually a common problem with the Acclaim home port, so I guess it's excusable. But it's a problem I never really ran into on the arcade version. And then there is one other problem, and this problem really does bother me. The characters are all the same height. Look, John Stockton is just as tall as Karl Malone. Now, normally I wouldn't mind that much. I can always like use my imagination. But if you look at the Genesis version of NBA Jam Tournament Edition, Stockton is clearly shorter. So why couldn't they make him shorter in Hangtime? Also, in Tournament Edition, the crowd actually moves, like every once in a while. In Hangtime, the crowd just sits there the whole time with no animation at all.
A spectacular dunk!
So I guess that they really wanted to focus all of their attention on those sprites that were in the foreground. I mean, it does make sense, right? But anyway, like I said, all of those problems are really minor annoyances. These are not make or break type things, they're just things that you notice if you look closely. So the truth is that NBA Hangtime is actually one of the best basketball games on the Sega Genesis. I think it's just as addictive as the NBA Live games. Now, the NBA Live games are fun, though there is a pretty steep learning curve. And these are 5-on-5 games after all, they're not 2-on-2. But personally, I would much rather play Hangtime. So if you're getting a Genesis and you want a really good basketball game, go for NBA Hangtime. It's a lot better than you expect. Anyway, that's the way that I feel about it, at least. I really do like NBA Hangtime on the Genesis. I'm looking forward now to giving like the Super Nintendo version a try and seeing how that is, seeing if it feels any different. I know already just from watching preview videos that it's a lot different from the Super Nintendo version of like Tournament Edition, which is great. But the big question here is, what do you think? I mean, do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you really think that, like I do, that Hangtime is better than those NBA Live games on the Genesis? Or am I being too generous to it? Are these other games better? Let me know what you think down below.